Okay, so just by way of introduction, sorry. I teach political science at BYU, Idaho. My primary focus is religion and politics. So I just wrote a book about how religion is the answer for the political divide in the United States. And I wrote an op-ed in the Deseret News you can read about if you care more about that. The reason I'm here is because I love to do surveys of members of our church. Peter is an expert on how should you say what you're an expert on, Peter?
So I'm a professor at the University of Southern California in the business school. And our focus really is on how people are using AI in the workplace, the degree to which they're adopting AI, for what uses, how is it that leaders and managers can manage change in that situation. So that's really where our research resides.
So I was super excited to do a survey about members of our church. I didn't care about the questions. So I'll tell you a little bit about the survey. So we contracted with a group called Sentiment. They have it's like an online panel, and they have a lot of members of the church. And so we paid these people some money to participate in the survey. 87% of our respondents come from the state of Utah, but you can see there's some dispersion in other states in the United States. I did something and you can see the demographics of our survey too. We asked them, one of the first questions is, are you a member of the church? How active are you in the church? So anyone who wasn't a member of the church got kind of kicked out of the survey. And then when you're paying people to do surveys, there's this incentive for them to just kind of like click through. So we have this attention question early on to make sure that people are paying attention to the survey. So I think we had maybe like 700 people start the survey, but in the end, there was just over 500 people that completed the survey. And you can see the other demographics. I'll get out of the way. You can see the other demographics of the survey. I did something that's called cluster analysis or k-means analysis. When you get all this survey data, sometimes it's nice to kind of like say, like, is there a way to group people together? And so I tried to find something where you could get like about a third of the respondents to fit into these categories. I thought church activity might be a really interesting way, but when I put it in the analysis, there's equal numbers roughly of active and less active members of the church in each of these three groups. So really what it kind of boils down to with members of the church, whether they're active or less active, is we use these questions about how comfortable are you with using technology generally, how often do you use artificial intelligence, and then we have these questions about whether you should use artificial intelligence for spiritual things. And Peter will talk about some more of those results in a second. But basically, I said, okay, let's put them into these three categories that I call the Silicon Saints. Those of you that fit in that category, you'll feel really proud of that label. You'll be like, yeah, I'm a Silicon Saint. I wasn't as good with compartmentalizers, but these are people that use AI a lot, but they use it differently, right? They're like, AI is a tool that I can use for some things, but not for spiritual things. And then there's a group I call the spiritual skeptics. You could just think of them as the skeptics. They don't use artificial intelligence. They almost kind of think it's evil or a bad tool or not very good. And they're definitely uncomfortable with using AI or the church using AI for spiritual related matters. Hopefully all of you in this room fit into one of those categories. And if you don't like the name I chose for you, you can tell me later, change my name to something else. But I know you Silicon Saints feel good about this. Okay.
All right, so I'm going to give a little snapshot of some of our survey's results. We have got a ton of questions. We're not going to get through all of these, but I think what Medler, Matt, and myself really wanted to do is get a baseline on what's happening within the Latter-day Saint community. And as Matt mentioned, this is all in the United States. And so we've got a series of questions, and I think the three buckets are really useful. So I mentioned that I do a lot of research in the context of organizations. We know that most leaders do not have effective conversations with their employees, largely because they don't understand the segments within those organizations in terms of their attitudes and their practices with AI. And so one of our genuine hopes with kind of looking at it through this prism is for each of us to think about, how do you have a productive conversation with people who line up in these ways? So we're going to show the results in the context of the Silicon Saints, the compartmentalizers, and then also the skeptics. So one of the things we'll illustrate really quickly here is we got a broad view of concerns that people have about AI. So this is broadly across society. I just want to point out a few things here. Whether you're a Silicon Saint, which is really an enthusiast for about AI in both your personal life, your spiritual life, your work life, or you're someone who's one of these AI skeptics, everyone here holds concerns. So these are the percentage of people who hold concerns on these different issues. And you can see there's large majorities on all of these. The skeptics, by and large, have about 10% higher percentage of people who are concerned about these issues. But we're going to pay a little bit more attention to some of the issues about people's practices in terms of church, their views on specific Latter-day Saint beliefs. So let's get into some of these. We'll start with this one. Is it appropriate? So this is a scale we had. How appropriate is it for to use AI for these specific purposes? So if you look at family history work, so that's this slide right here, you can see that there's wide agreement, whether you're the Silicon Saint or you're this skeptic. You think that AI is okay for that. We're going to move through these, and increasingly you're going to see the gaps increase between each of these types of users. Can we use it for gospel study? So again, here you'll notice like overwhelmingly we have this roughly third of the groups who are Silicon Saints. They say it's great. Go use it to help your gospel study in terms of AI. Even your spiritual skeptics, roughly half think it's okay. Go ahead and use AI reasonably for your gospel study. We heard a little bit in the last presentation about preparing a church talk or a lesson. And you can see it's a very similar pattern. Like the gap is kind of widening between the Silicon Saints and your skeptics, but still it's roughly the same, just about half of your skeptics. Now we're going to move into some of the areas in which there's wider differences. Should you use AI to create a tool to identify potential converts? That could be useful in some ways, right? But you'll notice like among the skeptics, all of a sudden you have 1 in 5 who say that's appropriate. So we do have a significant number of people in the church who think, they question that kind of activity. Among our Silicon Saints, they're pretty good with it. In his first presentation with Kim Clark today, he mentioned the whole idea of an AI coach. It's interesting in the workplace, there's all kinds of coaching AI apps at this point. And I don't know how many of you have tried or used these. In a business school, they get talked about all the time. Should you use that kind of app, that AI app, in terms of supporting spiritual growth? Here you see those percentages. So it's actually moving down all the way for everyone. So our people who are really the enthusiasts, the Silicon Saints, about 7 in 10 say that's great. Our skeptics, they don't love that idea. And even the people in the middle, we don't have a majority in terms of thinking about AI as a coach. Should we use AI to receive advice about personal ethical dilemmas? I actually really liked Josh's presentation in that we actually saw the types of questions that people were asking. And you can very easily envision what an ethical dilemma might look like in terms of asking the AI. Again, very similar pattern here with these types of users among Latter-day Saints.
Oh, that slide didn't transition. Oh, okay.
There we go. And the one that had the lowest approval of everything, we have a question, should we discuss our personal worthiness? And again, I think some of Josh's questions hit, these kinds of questions. And you see that we have, roughly half love this among the Silicon Saints, and then we have lower support among others. All right, perceived impact on AI, on LDS beliefs, practices, and values. So these ones had a scale of positive to negative. So one side of the scale is very positive, somewhat positive. On the other side was negative. So what you're going to see here are percentages who viewed each of these aspects as positive. So again, you're going to see the percentage numbers. These are the percentage of people who said they viewed these as a positive impact from AI. So first of all, lifelong learning and knowledge. I mean, all of us are professors on this paper. I think we love the church's stance on lifelong learning and knowledge. And you can generally see here that there's pretty broad support among your Silicon Saints and the compartmentalizers. They see AI's impact as really positive here. Not so much among the skeptics, but you still see quite a few there who support it. All right, the whole idea of eternal progression. Can AI have a positive impact on your eternal progression? So from here on out, you're going to see a pattern again where your Silicon Saints are pretty positive on these things, and your compartmentalizers and your spiritual skeptics, not so much. Faith in Christ. Can AI have a positive impact on our faith itself? Again, you see pretty high numbers. Roughly 2/3 of our Silicon Saints think, yes, it can help me build faith in Christ. Compartmentalizers and spiritual skeptics, not so much. Moral agency. I think in the morning sessions, we heard this term a few times. I think this is one of people's greatest concerns is, will AI take our agency away, and in particular our moral agency if we rely on it too heavily? Very similar pattern here. I think I missed one. Human connection and empathy. I think Medler opened the conference suggesting how important it was to have front and center this idea of, to what degree does AI impact our relationships? I think it's really useful for us to have that always in mind, because one of the unintended consequences in the work that I see is that AI actually creates kind of a suspicion or mistrust when people use it too much when they communicate with one another. So to what degree is it a positive influence overall on human connection and empathy? Again, a very similar pattern, but you see all of these numbers moving down a little bit. Revelation through prophets, similar pattern here. And our understanding of the nature of creation. Medler this morning also mentioned this issue of, can AI be conscious or sentient? So we have a series of questions. Again, what you're getting here is a snapshot of some of these, and we do have a white paper that will be available to read the full, all of these items collectively. But you see there's quite a few people actually view the possibility of AI as being conscious or sentient overall. All right, views of church and parental involvement. So you saw that there was kind of this gap that emerged on a lot of these items as far as your Silicon Saints, your compartmentalizers, and your spiritual skeptics. But it's interesting, there is a lot of support among all groups for the church and parents to be really involved. I mean, people generally agree that they want some kind of guidance and conversation. So let's look at just a few of the items that we had here. This first item, I support interfaith efforts. We heard a lot about this morning, right? And you can see there's support among all of these groups. We do want to see faiths get together and figure out the ways in which we can ensure that AI is lining up with enduring moral values. Parents and church leaders actively teaching youth. Again, we see pretty strong agreement. So there's certainly a place here among the broad LDS committee, however much they're using AI, they'd like to see this. I look to church leaders for ongoing guidance. Very similar question, pretty similar results. You're getting pretty wide support for this. And then just one final question, kind of in this area, I would be disappointed if the church is using AI. The church is using AI, by the way. But it's interesting. Here you see, your Silicon Saints and your compartmentalizers, very few would be disappointed with that thought. But then you have this group of skeptics who they find that troubling or problematic. So this is pretty roughly, we ran through these pretty quickly. Again, this is a snapshot. We have a white paper. We intentionally want to have 10 to 15 minutes here to open up for some reactions, some questions that we can answer for you about the survey. So do we have a mic that can go around? Anyone who's got comments, reactions? Got a hand way in the back.
Concerning the sentient question, that was quite a high percentage of all three of the categories. So I'm done now.
And so
that, do you think? Why? Whoa, echo.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Why do so many people think that AI can become sentient? I have no idea. I would say I'm fascinated to see how this stuff changes as AI technologies advance. I think like right now we're just in the infancy. And I think that when you ask people these kinds of questions, there are a lot of people that really don't know. Like there was an option people could choose that say like, it's not, yeah, I guess they could have said it's not possible. We asked them, could they have a soul? That's also an interesting one we didn't put in here. I can't remember the results on that one though.
Yeah, and I just want to offer a thought. Again, the white paper will be useful in this regard because we've collapsed some of the categories here on the scales. So I'd encourage you to look at that. But I think we went into this project with genuine curiosity. We didn't know how these answers were going to turn out, which is always fun for a survey project. So I do all of these AI surveys all the time. This one was one where I really didn't know how people were going to respond.
And just real quick to that point, because Peter does know that there are national surveys that ask some questions about AI, and we put those in our survey. And we show that members of our church attitudes about AI are not largely different from the general US population broadly.
Yeah, right.
Did you ask the people that took the survey what their knowledge of AI was? Because I guess if I would have taken this survey 2 years ago, my only knowledge of AI was ChatGPT. But there's like so much, instead of just large language models. So do you know what kind of percentage of people know more than just ChatGPT or something, and like how they can use predictive analysis or things like that?
Yeah, we don't have a precise question in that. I mean, to be completely honest, we were like trying to pack more questions than we could get in. Like we pay for the survey responses, right? We have a measure. This is in October of this year, so this is current. And we do have some questions around comfort with using new technologies, how quickly you adopt things, which I think are pretty good proxies for that.
We also have frequency of use of AI, right? So the Silicon Saints and the compartmentalizers use AI daily, if not weekly, if not daily. So the skeptics hardly ever use it, so possibly they don't know much about it, but those top two categories use it a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, we have that question in here. We didn't show it here. I'll repeat the question. The question is, do we have a perception of how accurate members believe the information about the LDS Church is when AI is asked a question? Is that the question? We do have that measure, and a majority of each group believe that the information, they're concerned about it. So it's one of the concerns. They're concerned about the accuracy. The concerns are highest among the skeptics. The concern, though, is across the board.
More than half respondents are concerned about the accuracy of the responses.
But specifically about the LDS Church.
We didn't ask that question. Mm-hmm. There's one over here.
Two quick questions. The first one is, did you look at generative AI and people's fears about that might erode our trust in reality? Were there any questions that were kind of related to that?
I don't think we asked that. How would I phrase that question?
Well, it's like thinking used to be, like seeing used to be believing, right? And it's not anymore. So what does it mean when we have, say, politicians that say, oh, that's generative AI when it wasn't, or vice versa, for example? Then what does that mean for us as members of the church?
Concerns.
Yeah, we have this. I'll show you everything we have on that. It's on this first slide. This one here, right? So they're concerned about these things, but there's not specifically like a concern about like reality being altered or something. We didn't ask that specific question.
Probably the closest is that third item that says, are you worried about it impersonating people?
Right. Okay, the other question is a little more technical. I'm just wondering if you did any principal component analysis on the data, because all of these are so strongly correlated. It'd be super interesting to see the distribution on that axis between these three groups, and then to watch that evolving over time.
Yeah, we did not do any factor analysis on this. We just did k-means to get the three groups.
Yeah, super interesting. Thanks.
Yeah.
I think all the way back here. Yeah.
In the three groups that you have, I didn't see anything are there age differences in the three groups, or are they pretty dispersed in ages in
let me go back.
Groups?
Yeah, we didn't age differences didn't pop as a distinguishing characteristic. So we could look at in the groups the mean age for each of them, but based on the analysis we did, my guess is it's pretty evenly distributed. Although that seems like the skeptics maybe wouldn't. They're maybe a little bit older there, but yeah, I didn't look at that specifically.
This might be a question related to correlations, but if there are people who are concerned about their data being misused and privacy, it just seems that from that you wouldn't be asking advice or discussing your worthiness. Are those just linked?
I'll let you take that one, Peter.
We'd have to run that. I'm not sure, but that's an interesting question to ask. Full disclosure, the data set was completed 1 week ago. So this is like the descriptive version of what we have, and we'll continue to dig deeper into it.
To that point, I assume the answer is no, but maybe an interesting follow-on would be to see if there's some thematic direction around how AI is affecting members' testimonies. So specifically, I'm interested in like doomsday scenarios or the idea of creating a new species and how that impacts our concepts of the second coming and our purpose here on earth. Is that anything that's resonated from your data so far?
Well, not from the close-ended questions. We do have open-ended survey response, open-ended items we need to go through, and then we have a plan to do interviews, and the interviews is where we're going to capture that kind of those kinds of thematic issues.
So if I'm being totally honest, the reason I'm interested in your questions is because we're going to do snowball sampling and get another 500 people that aren't recruited and paid to do the survey. And then we're going to do in-depth interviews of about 100, 150 people. And I started the questionnaire, like what we're going to ask interviews, and I had no idea what to ask. And so I appreciate your questions because we'll ask those questions. Are there other questions?
Yeah, right here. And
For both presentations this afternoon, I'm interested in the question of referral out to a human or compared to a human. All of what you've described here sounds absolute about AI. That is, do you trust it? Do you think it's sentient? But do you have any kind of comparative compared to talking to your bishop, for example?
Yeah, that's a great question. We did not ask that question, but I think that's a really interesting, the comparison of the two, right? We know that people are using them for dual purposes. What's their perception of where they're getting the best information or the connection and those sorts of things? That's a great question.
I think that, again, going to be really helpful in the interviews to ask that question where you get into scenarios and really elaborate with people on those issues. Yeah.
So the question is if we want to use AI to help with the interviews. I'm one of these spiritual skeptics. I'm just kidding. I would be shocked. I do like to use artificial intelligence to analyze qualitative data. I don't like using artificial intelligence to generate questions because I feel like that's me. I don't want in the end, like I do something, they're like, we're so proud of you. And I'm like, well, AI did most of that for me. It doesn't feel good to me, but I'm sure there's a space for that, for using AI for that.
Okay, so I'm a Silicon saint. And I use AI all the time to help me generate survey questions. So
yeah. So we might.
But I mean, obviously, you go back and it's your work in the end. You go through and very carefully vet it and think it through. But I feel like there's a big place for AI in research. And in our business school, we have every 2 weeks, we have a presentation about how people are using it. In like literature review, methodologies, the developing the research analysis across the board.
So if there are no more questions, for me, the big picture takeaway, I study a lot about how church leaders say things and how that influences people's political views, political attitudes, their behavior. If you look through the survey data closely and you look at what church leaders are saying about artificial intelligence, it's really easy to go through this checklist and be like, sinner, 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 right? Like people aren't following the brethren in some certain ways. But what I find comfort in personally as a member of our church is that there's so much diversity in our church. And he can be a Silicon saint and someone could be a skeptic, and we all belong and we all fit in and we're all a part of it. And every single one of these groups looks to church leaders for guidance. Every single one of these groups wants guidance from church leaders about how to use artificial intelligence. How they interpret it is always kind of like is a little bit judgy, right? For me to just kind of categorize people. But I love the diversity of views that we have in the church. It allows conferences like this to happen where we can get together and talk about things and disagree and kind of figure out how does all of this work for me personally. So for me, that's the big picture thing that I think is cool. And that's all.
All right. Thank you.